Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. I'm Edie Goldberg. I'm a human resource management consultant located in Silicon Valley, and I'm excited to be welcoming you today. And welcome to the Leading Transformational Change Forum, brought to you by the Consortium for Change, powered by One Business World, and inspired by the book, The Secret Sauce for Leading Transformational Change. Today is day one of a 3-day virtual conference, and we're excited to have 9 sessions offered today that focus on the leaders of transformational change. Our opening keynote speaker today is Kevin Delaney, the CEO and editor-in-chief of Charter, a future of work media and research company. Charter designs new frameworks for work so that people and organizations thrive. You can think of them like a next generation Harvard Business Review meets McKinsey for the future of work. And their free weekly newsletter is a must read for people leaders. Kevin was previously the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Quartz, a senior editor for the New York Times, and managing editor of the Wall Street Journal. Today, he's going to discuss some very timely research that Charter has recently released on the with the support of Innovation Research Center for Human Resources, or IRC for HR. It's about how to implement artificial intelligence tools while strengthening workers rather than undermining them. Kevin, take it away.
Edie, thank you so much. So for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to share the research that, as you said, we've just released. I'll pull up my slides here and hopefully everyone can see them. And at Charter, what we're trying to do is bridge research to practice. And we're concerned that in this moment, at a time of really important transition around the introduction of artificial intelligence in workplaces, that these technologies were not going to work for all workers, and that the way that we were hearing organizations talk about them publicly was that these technologies would actually potentially undermine workers as opposed to strengthening them. And so, as you mentioned, with the support of the IRC, the International Innovation Resource Center for Human Resources, IRC for HR, we undertook a pretty large-scale survey this summer of workers and managers, and with the goal of producing a research playbook for how organizations can actually, what they can do at this juncture, trying to make sure that underrepresented groups, especially and workers more broadly, are not undermined as these technologies are brought in. So you can see this is the report that we released. It's a 60-page report that goes through the research, which I'll walk you through today. And at the end, I'll share a link where people can actually download it themselves. As I mentioned, we did a large-scale survey this summer. It included, we used a research platform called Glimpse, and included managers, individual contributors, salaried and hourly workers. We concentrated on a few industries: hospitality, manufacturing, and knowledge work. And we had a representative sample across race, gender, ethnicity, and across the US. In addition, we actually conferred with expert practitioners, labor economists, research scientists, and organizers to help contextualize our findings and work on some of the recommendations. The goal of this is to have a guide that is for workers. You know, we believe that centering them in this conversation, as they're not often centered, is critical. And so we hope that this reflects their needs and concerns. For HR practitioners, we want to offer some strategic frameworks and playbooks, and for all leaders to help them prioritize beneficial worker outcomes and look ahead and see around corners. So I'll dive into what the research findings were. So the first one is that the workers and managers we surveyed found that they actually had some optimism that artificial intelligence could actually bring some benefits for them. And you can see on this slide, when we asked them what they thought those benefits would be: time savings, generating new ideas, higher quality work, lower stress. Few people thought they might actually get more time off thanks to the introduction of AI, the optimists in the group. And among the things that the responses that we had, one worker said, I'm confident that AI will not replace my job, as a computer will never make the creative leaps humans can. And I like that it saves me time so I can do more things. In terms of how people are actually using AI in their workplaces today, as a context for what we're about to talk about, you can see across these different sectors, text generation, data analysis, research across these different industries. You also see customer service in service sector and manufacturing sector as being some of the areas. It turns out that most of the respondents in our study have actually experimented with generative AI personally, about 2/3 of them. That may seem like a high number, but it is in line with what other surveys have found. So there are some, reasons for concern and watchouts that was one of the purpose of this research, was to try and see if the ways in which underrepresented groups have been left behind in previous tech and economic transitions was also a risk here. And we do see some signs for concern. We looked across all races and ethnicities, but we found that Black respondents stood out in the concern about AI replacing them in their jobs. It was 14 percentage points higher, so 53% of Black respondents, than for white respondents, for example. Interestingly, the Black respondents actually, they're more likely to be using generative AI tools in their jobs compared to white colleagues. They're more likely to be enthusiastic about the prospect of using generative AI as part of their work. So there's definitely, one of the nuances is that while there is concern, there is actually a level of engagement. The other area where we saw potential for reason for concern was across gender. And so what we found is that women respondents were much less likely than male respondents be using generative AI tools in their work currently. This is echoed across other research that has been published over the last year. We also found that women had much lower levels of optimism around the use of AI in the workplace. There are potential reasons for this: greater job insecurity, potentially less available time for experimentation with AI tools because of caregiving responsibilities, and perhaps women that we surveyed were just more skeptical in ways that can serve in ways that can serve everyone. One other layer on this is that other research has found that women are more likely to work in jobs that have high levels of exposure to AI and seemingly greater insecurity as a result. So we'll come back in a few minutes to some of the ways in which workplaces can actually support groups, but here are some of the things that our research said. The other area in which we saw reasons for concern was around age. We saw a really significant drop off in the use of AI, in excitement around it, in use in the work, particularly as workers are 45 years old or older. One of the participants in our study responded, "I worry that my expertise may be outmoded." And this suggests a confidence gap that leaders might need to address with additional encouragement and support for older workers. Another gap that we found was between people with management responsibilities and those who do not have management responsibilities. And again, we're seeing people who are managers actually using AI much more in their personal lives and their work, have much more optimism, and predict that it will change people's jobs more quickly. So there is something to think about. There's a landscape across both workers and managers in terms of their own feelings about AI and their level of experience with it. We asked workers, when you think about how generative AI might impact your work in the future, what first comes to mind? And perhaps not surprisingly, the concerns that were expressed were around job loss and replacement, data privacy, the quality of the work. One of the respondents said, "It may replace me because my employer may think it's cheaper and as effective compared to our human." to a human. Here's some of the other respondents. It's a little scary. I need to update myself. I'm concerned that people will be jobless if regulations are not made. One thing that we looked at in part through our conversations with the experts is historically when new technology has a greater likelihood of being embraced. And this was echoed across the workers and managers that we studied. This is something of a cheat sheet of success factors in bringing any new technology, and in this case, artificial intelligence, into the workplace. And there's some basic principles, which you can see on the screen now, that workers are actually involved, that this is not just a top-down chief technology officer or chief financial officer initiative. It actually addresses issues that are real in their work, and not things that someone in another office imagined were things that were extracting. They have ability to control the technology, so it's not just taking control of their work, but it's in more of an advisory role. We've seen some research in call centers in India where worker engagement and performance is significantly greater when they feel like they are in control. It augments their creative knowledge, and is injury preventing. And then there's ample training and notice of the changes that are actually coming. So when technology is more likely to be rejected is the flip side of the things I've just been talking about. The technology is forced upon workers. It's used in extractive, racist, or dehumanizing ways. It's used, there's a surveillance component about it. It doesn't address problems that they're actually feeling in their work, and they're further stressed without getting the support or coaching. One of the experts we interviewed, Olga Ryzikowski at Princeton, noted the people at the table really need to be very closely connected to what the actual application is going to be, what the downstream deployment is going to look like. And what we see is that workers can help identify the promising use cases. They can help identify how technology will impact their workflow, and they can help identify how new technology will impact service. There's this famous example where an automated drink ordering system was put into at a Las Vegas casinos, and the idea was this would introduce greater efficiency. No one consulted the wait staff prior to doing this, and it turns out it was a disaster because the server is the person who is interacting with the customer while taking their order. They're monitoring whether people are drinking too much. And then often the gamblers were actually moving between machines, and the automated system was completely incapable of knowing that the same person was now playing at another different slot machine. And so in the canon of research in this area, it's a classic example of when workers are not consulted in rolling out technology, the results are generally not particularly good. One of the people we interviewed, one of the experts, Ben Biglighter, he's Deputy Director of Research for Unite here, the union representing hospitality workers, describes some of the dynamics that we see with artificial intelligence. You have the creators of the tools. These are the AI platforms or tools. They're the purchasers, who are often people in technology positions in organizations. And then you have primary users, who are the workers whose work is impacted by them. And often, it's when you see it and say it, it seems quite obvious, but often there isn't actually a dialogue among these three parties. And the only dialogue is between the creators and the purchasers, and the primary users are an afterthought. So this is a useful framework to think about how this technology is put into place. When we asked workers what they wanted, and so this is, for talent leaders, what are the key things for you to do? The answers were pretty clear. One good aspect of this is that employees are looking to their employers for guidance and in terms of how AI is rolled out, which I'll talk about in a second. But it was really clear that workers want the plans communicated with them. And this actually may not, you may not know exactly how AI will impact jobs, but you can at least share the extent of which you know at this point. We're going to try these tools. We're going to assess after 3 or 6 months. We anticipate that they'll improve the output of our staff, and we're going to stay in communication with you before implementing them further. That's an example of the sort of communication that people want. They're looking for training, and there is a high level of interest among workers to have employer-provided learning experiences. You can note on this chart the last item is actually a budget for independent learning, and one nuance that we found is that workers like to be asked how they learn effectively, including given some autonomy about the learning experience. So they're not just, everyone in the company isn't just asked to log into a LinkedIn learning session at the same time. And then the other important thing is workers want to be involved in shaping the organization's approach to AI, adoption. So the thing to take away is workers want you to communicate, to teach, and to involve them. And as we know, as we talked about a few minutes ago, the history of tech adoption suggests that you'll have much greater success when you do that. A good thing is that workers actually feel pretty empowered to raise concerns about AI with their managers, and they're also pretty trusting of their employers generally about the plans to implement AI in ways that won't actually damage them. So there is a foundation that we're seeing for dialogue around this, that workers are actually open and wanting dialogue around this. Here are some of the responses that we heard in the research. Be open and as upfront about it as possible. Clearly state, give me more job responsibilities that AI can't do. So let's work together to figure out how my job can be changed and updated so that AI does its thing and I actually do something that is not fully overlapping with AI. So we asked workers, one of the things that we think is really important is to understand what workers' aspirations are in this moment. So we asked study participants about what they're actively working toward in the year ahead. And what we're hearing is deepening expertise in current roles, growing networks, earning a promotion, getting a new job. These are all aspirations and align in many ways with how you can think about implementing this technology. Does the implementation of AI deepen the expertise of someone in their role? Does it allow them to grow their network? Does it allow them to advance? That is a more worker-centered focus on how to use this technology. As Aaron Terrazas, one of the experts we interviewed, who's the chief economist at Glassdoor, said, it's not managers versus workers, it's everyone working together to make something meaningful. So I have one thing I want to come back to now to finish off the presentation portion of this is to talk about the ways that workplaces and leaders can actually put this research into effect, how they can use this to shape their organization's approaches. So you have a little checklist here, which is in the research report, and which you can download. The first thing that we found is that the way some organizations are talking about AI can be exclusionary instead of, and so the goal is to set a more inclusive tone. And one starting point for that is actually just use approachable language instead of talking about LLMs and other kind of technical models. Actually, talk about specifically what the technology is able to do. Another thing is involving workers as stakeholders in the design, selection, and implementation of AI technology. A lot of organizations have working groups, and it's probably about going beyond the working groups to actually spend the time with individual workers and teams to understand, to talk about the ways in which AI tools can be brought in and get their feedback in terms of how they can be used. Learning how your organization's workers and managers want to be developed. I mentioned that what we heard from respondents was that they had thoughts about how they actually wanted to be trained, and listening to that as opposed to just having a corporate-wide solution that isn't flexible and doesn't hear them. Among the things we heard a few slides ago was that workers were interested in individual budgets for training from their employers, and merely making them available, whether workers uh, fully take advantage of them or not, signals that you believe that they should have autonomy in this process. One thing to think about is framing AI usage. It's often framed in terms of and talked about in terms of productivity. This will increase worker productivity. And in fact, that's not always motivating for workers, and in some ways enters you into a framework that's more likely to justify cutting jobs if workers are more productive or not hiring as many workers. One framework which does seem to resonate with workers is talking about the quality of the work that they're doing. If the quality of the work is able to improve, they're able to satisfy customer service questions more quickly and more fully and more accurately using tools, for example, that can be motivating for workers. There's also the questions of autonomy. If you have these tools, you may not need to rely on a manager or other colleague to be able to actually do your job. That can be motivating for workers as well. A few more things before we wrap up. One is one of the big takeaways of the academic research this year is that AI tools are actually able to produce significantly greater gains for lower skilled, less experienced workers. And so that's an interesting opportunity to up level lower skilled and less experienced workers to the level of their colleagues. And that's potentially an opportunity to simultaneously look at some of the inequalities and underrepresentation that exists in workplaces and use this as a vector of actually addressing them and narrowing some of their gaps. And then just to underscore that underrepresented groups, as we saw early on, by race, gender, and age, are at different places in terms of their familiarity with and their concerns about AI. And one important thing for organizations to do is be sure to highlight the benefits specific to diverse users. It's to actually make sure that there's outreach and inclusion of people in those groups, especially. It's potentially creating special opportunities to engage with the technology by people, and not to assume intuition with these technologies. And as we saw with older workers, they may not have the confidence to actually engage initially at the same level as some of their colleagues. And so really focusing on who are the people who are in these training sessions, what is their experience of them, for example, and highlighting models of people in underrepresented groups who are engaging and successful as models for their peers is a really good practice. The last two things are just communicating to employees, and we saw that this is one of the top asks, was the top ask of workers, to understand how AI could change their roles, but without making sweeping decisions and predictions. We've seen some companies say, we think over the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to have fewer people in X position. Actually, often it's HR because of the introduction of these technologies. That's probably not a helpful statement to make right now. And rather, the helpful thing is to say, over the next 6 months, we're going to experiment with these technologies. We think that people will be doing less of this. We know that in customer service roles, for example, it's actually, and coding, some of the other applications, it's actually producing significant time savings and efficiency. And let's see how this applies in our own organization and how this impacts our outlook for the longer term. So this is a checklist of some things to think about to try and center workers and not undermine them, but rather strengthen them as AI is brought into your organizations. On this slide, you can see the address online. This 60-page playbook is available for download for free. I'd encourage you to do that and reach out to us. There, our address is in there with any questions you have, and also any thoughts about follow-up, as it's an issue that we're following really closely. We do, as Edie mentioned, have a weekly free newsletter that touches on this and other topics, and this QR code and this URL are a way that you can easily sign up to stay in touch with us on these things. So thank you for your time, and really I want to acknowledge again the support of IRC for this research, and that has made it possible to make what we think is some unique research available at this important moment.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for such a great presentation. There have been a couple of questions in the chat, so I just want to get to those. The first question, of course, is will your presentation deck be available to participants?
Sure, we'd be happy to make it available, and pretty much all of the material is available in the playbook.
And I've read the playbook, so I can tell you all the information is there indeed. Pat Pawazzer asks, what insights do you have about the impact of the quality of the AI output? I think there are a lot of concerns, we hear about it hallucinating. And so the question is, is using it going to be helpful because it's going to give us quality output?
Yeah, this is a very legitimate concern, and I would say two things. One is we're seeing in academic research studies that the quality is actually high enough to produce really significant gains for workers and in the quality of work. There are a bunch of studies that have been conducted in call centers, for example, that found that call center workers using generative AI tools were actually able to better serve customers using these tools. There's a big research study by a bunch of academics that was conducted using hundreds of BCG management consultants, and found that they actually were their completion of a series of tasks involving a fictional shoe company was graded both by AI and by humans to be higher quality, and it was actually completed at much greater efficiency when they were using generative AI tools. So in terms of work output, we are seeing significant improvements. The other area that people look at is computer coding, where we know that there. That said, one way to think about it is I think that the attribute or the skill of judgment. So a lot of the traditional management skills like delegation and judgment and reviewing work and prioritizing actually are still pretty applicable here. And as you pointed out, there are hallucinations and mistakes that the AI introduces, and it's up to humans to continue to exercise oversight and judgment. And you think if you might have had an intern at some point who didn't have the full context and might make mistakes, whose work you supervise, that's perhaps a way that you could think about the use of AI, that it still requires human oversight and judgment.
Great. Thank you. That was a fabulous answer. There are a couple questions in the question and answer, and somebody did point out the chat function is disabled. So if you do have questions throughout this conference, please put them in the Q&A. Several of the questions are related to the research, and if you go ahead and download his research, your questions will be answered there. We are up on our time. I want to thank Kevin once again for fabulous research and for sharing it with us, and I wish everyone a great rest of your conference.
Thank you, Edie.